Hello and welcome to our Friday Digest and the second of our legislative priority webinars. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ramon Palencia, Deputy Director and Director of CHERISH Maryland for Maryland LCV. As always, your presence here speaks to the power of our community and to your commitment to the environmental issues that impacts us all. Our goal with Friday Digest is to provide you with information, tools, and resources so you can be an informed and active advocate. We all want those virtual meetings to reflect your interests and needs, so please let us know what you want to hear from us. And the easiest way to do this is by filling out the survey you will receive at the end of the session. As folks continue to join in, please type again your name if you haven't done so and where you're calling from in the chat. Throughout our time together, feel free to drop any questions or comments in the Q&A or chat box, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the discussion. Today, I'm excited to dive into one of Maryland LCV's legislative priorities for 2025, the CHERISH Our Communities Act. This environmental justice bill addresses a critical gap in how Maryland protects communities from pollution. To help us understand the importance of this legislation, I'm joined by two fantastic guests today. Jennifer Kunze is the Maryland Organizing Director of Clean Water Action, who will provide a deeper look at the CHERISH Act. And Carlos Orbe, Communications and Public Affairs Specialist at Maryland Nonprofits and Maryland Latinos Unidos, who will share insights from a community perspective. Thank you and welcome both. We also again want to leave time at the end for questions from the audience for discussion. So please put them on the chat or the Q&A. And we have a lot to cover today and in a short time. So let's get us started. With that, let me pass it over to Jennifer to give us an overview of the CHERISH Act. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Ramon. And yeah, hi, everybody. Jennifer Kunze with Clean Water Action, live in Baltimore City. And Clean Water Action is one of two co-anchors of the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition in Maryland, which is the coalition of folks that developed this bill over the summer and the fall. And we're really excited to be bringing it to the legislature and to be bringing it to you because it's really going to address some critical gaps in how the state does and does not and can and cannot yet protect communities from an overburdening of pollution. So the CHERISH Act stands for From Cumulative Harms to Environmental Restoration for Improving Our Shared Health. And it's really focused on looking at the most polluted communities in Maryland, the types of facilities that do the most harm in those most polluted communities, and making sure that the state has all of the tools and obligations that it needs in order to protect communities from being overburdened from pollution. So I'll walk through the basics of what the bill does and how it's structured, if could get to the next slide. So the first really important thing about the CHERISH Act is where would it apply? And we're targeting the top quarter most polluted communities in Maryland. And the way that that's determined is by a tool that MDE has developed over the last couple of years called the Maryland EJ Screen. And this is a great map that looks at a lot of different factors in the community, demographic factors, health factors, known air pollution and water and land pollution factors, in order to rank communities on a scale of 1 to 100 on which ones are the most overburdened by pollution and the most impacted by environmental injustice. And I would love to show you that map, but unfortunately it is temporarily down at the moment. MDE is currently working on revamping it to not rely on federal data for obvious reasons. But that's something they've known is going to be an issue, and it'll be available again soon. But the important thing to know is that the CHERISH Act is very targeted on applying to the 25% most polluted environmental justice communities in Maryland. And that's important because, you know, environmental racism, classism, lots of different factors all mean that pollution gets concentrated into specific geographic areas where people are also already dealing with a lot of other injustices that make it hard to address both fighting off polluting facilities and dealing with the consequences on people's health of polluting facilities, with South Baltimore being a very big example, but there are many communities dealing with these challenges statewide. So that's the geographic scope of the bill. Next slide. So the second important thing to know about the CHERISH Act is, what does it cover? So over the summer and the fall, South Baltimore Community Land Trust, which is a member of the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition, led a process of working with other communities in South Baltimore and other communities in environmental justice communities statewide to develop a list of what are the types of facilities that are having the biggest impact on people's health and environmental justice communities. So something that's really important and distinctive about the CHERISH Act is that what it covers did come from community organizations saying, this is what an environmental justice bill needs to cover. So for these types of facilities, the process kicks in when the CHERISH Act will kick in when companies apply for certain kinds of permits to pollute for these types of facilities. So it's both very it covers the types of facilities that have the biggest negative impact on people's health, without capturing other types of activities like, for example, housing development that we do want as positive developments in communities. So it's very targeted to this community-generated list of facilities and permits. Next slide. So what the CHERISH Act does inside of that framework, whenever a company applies for a permit to pollute that's on that list, for the type of facility that's on that list, in one of the census tracts that's covered by the bill, it starts this process that gives MDE the tools that it needs to assess the number one question, which is, in this already overburdened by pollution community, will issuing this permit to pollute make things worse? And if the study and the public input that MDE does determines that yes, it will make it worse, then it says that MDE needs to act to protect the community by denying the permit in some conditions, putting extra conditions on the permit in other circumstances, and making sure that the community is also getting some direct compensation for the fact that they're facing this disproportionate burden of pollution. And then the final thing that the bill does is, for these covered facilities and permits, whenever there's a enforcement action because they have polluted outside of the scope of their permit, then that information is going to be more transparent to the community, and some of the money from the fees for that permit violation will also go directly to the community. So yeah, we're really excited about the CHERISH Act addressing some really big gaps in how MDE can and cannot protect communities from pollution right now. And yeah, that's your overview for how the bill does, and I'll turn it back to Ramon.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was an incredible overview. So as we can see, this is an important bill to protect communities against pollution, to increase transparency in the permit process, decision-making process, increase public participation, and also secure funds for those communities that have been overburdened by pollution. So let me ask you one thing. We have talked about permits, but for some folks that might not be in the trenches of environmental policy, share with us what exactly is a permit and why are they so important?
Good question. Yeah. So, whenever a company or a facility or, even a government entity wants to do something that will issue pollution into the atmosphere or into the water or onto the land, Maryland's regulatory structures say that they need to apply for a permit. And in that, they need to you can apply for different kinds of permits. For example, there are major source air pollution permits and minor source air pollution permits based on different thresholds for different pollutants. But the company or the permit applicant needs to say, this is what we're going to be doing. This is how much pollution it's going to generate. We're letting the state know about it and applying for permission to do that. So then the state can approve or deny that permit. So that's really important environmental bulwarks. And those are handled at the state level, which is especially important right now with everything that's going on at the federal level, that this is a responsibility of the state. And so the state can step up in how it's protecting communities by issuing or not issuing permits.
Thank you, Jennifer. So with the short time we have, let me turn it over to Carlos. Carlos, thank you for joining us today. You're deeply connected to community and you work directly with community members. Based on your conversations, what are residents telling you about the challenges that they're facing nowadays vis-a-vis all we are discussing today?
Well, I think Jennifer brought up some really good points and how it disproportionately affects the community. So I would say I want to paint the picture, right? So living near these polluting facilities, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a daily struggle for health, safety, and the quality of life. So in communities like Curtis Bay, which you're going to be hearing Curtis Bay a lot, so bear with me, and Langley Park. But also Brooklyn, Maryland, and Turner Station residents, they're grappling with like these long-term effects of exposure, right, to toxic air, contaminated water, and industrial waste. And there's more specifics to come on that below. But make no mistake, as Jennifer said, these challenges are compounded by systemic inequities that are designed to limit access to healthcare, economic opportunities, and political power. So these people are experiencing firsthand and letting us know. Now, for the specific health disparities, residents report higher rates of asthma, cancer, and cardiovascular diseases. In our community, right, the Latino community, a lot of these terms kind of sound sci-fi, right? For example, Curtis Bay, the Bresco trash incinerator, how it emits pollutants like nitrogen oxides and particulate matter. It might sound like these are just words, but they're linked to serious respiratory illnesses. And, to quote the American Lung Association, studies show that Black and Latino communities are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to live near hazardous facilities compared to white communities. And, as I said before, the economic inequities. Carlos, what does that mean, right? Many residents feel trapped in a cycle of poverty because property values are depressed due to pollution, and job opportunities are often tied to the same industries causing harm. So I love giving examples, right? In South Baltimore, where many Latino and Black families live, the median income is $35,000, well below the average, the state average of 91,000. Now that's take it from me, don't take it from me. That's the US Census Bureau. So there's a lot of things that we have to deal with, but also what about lack of transparency, right? Residents often find out about new facilities or permit renewals after the fact, leaving them with little time to voice concerns. And this lack of engagement exasperates feelings of disempowerment and neglect. So, I mean, MOU has been working with communities to address these specific challenges. We've heard from families who, quite frankly, are just tired of seeing their children suffer from asthma and other illnesses caused by pollution when compared to their counterparts. Now, this is why MLU has been advocating for bills like these, CHERISH Act and the Reclaim Renewable Energies Act, to ensure that no community is left behind. And on a more personal note, I have been working with Jennifer. I think this is now our second or third year, and we truly have an advocate for the people here willing to get these bills out and have everyone hear firsthand what's going on. So I hope that sheds some light, and there will be more to come. But I think for now, that's my piece on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carlos. And I'm glad you brought that up. How all these issues really, all this pollution really affects our health. It affects our pocketbook. It affects our housing prices. So those are the real world consequences when one of our children gets sick with or has an asthma attack, having to go to the hospital, having to miss school, the parent having to miss days of work, all the medical bills. So those are the real issues that this bill is hoping, part of this bill is hoping to address those issues. Um, Carlos, let me do a follow-up. I'm a community member. I'm not sure if this bill will affect me or if my community is in one of those areas that is going to be impacted by the bill, covered by the bill. How can I find out?
Right, and that is a great question. People are like, okay, you hear about this news, but does it impact me? Do I have to care right now? And so I will say, let's just cut to the chase, right? How do you check? You visit the Maryland Department of Environment, the MDE website, and you access the EJ screening tool, right? It's as easy as just entering your address or census tract to see your area's environmental justice score. And if your community scores 75 or above, or is within a 1.5-mile radius of such an area, the CHERISH Act would apply to you. Now, okay, Carlos, we have the website. What does EJ and all these things mean? Now, to determine if your community is protected under the CHERISH Act, you can also use the Maryland Environmental Justice Screening Tool. This tool assigns an EJ score, like I just said, to census tracts based on factors like pollution exposure, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And I just want to revisit that fact. Areas with the EJ score of 75 or higher are considered high burden communities and would be covered by the CHERISH Act. Carlos, you're repeating a lot of things. Why does it matter? Well, in Maryland, communities like Curtis Bay and Westport in South Baltimore have seen some of the highest environment EJ scores in the state, often in the 99th percentile, right? So these areas are disproportionately burdened by pollution from incinerators, landfills, and industrial facilities. I wanted to bring back the example of the Bresco trash incinerator in Curtis Bay because it's emitting pollutants, like I said, which are still linked to that respiratory illness. I want to say that for Latino and immigrant communities in areas like Langley Park and Hyattsville, this tool can help identify whether they are in high burden areas. Now, MOU has been advocating for tools like this for years to ensure that communities are informed and empowered to fight for health and environment. I was seeing in the chat, there are people from Silver Spring, there are people from all over these areas that you should check if the EJ score is affecting you or not. Thank you, Ramon.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And I believe Jennifer mentioned that the website is down at the moment, the MDE. But so I'm going to give a plug now. In our website, we have those maps classified by county. So folks can go to our website, see the maps of their county, see the areas, get an understanding of what is an overburdened, underserved community, what are the indicators that determine that. And they also have overlap, overburden, and underserved areas. So for the time being, I'll direct you to go to our website. We can put the link on the chat so you can take a look at your county. Let me turn it over to Jennifer. When MDE is considering a permit, what do they look at specifically? And more importantly, what are they missing?
Right. So when MDE receives a permit application and they're evaluating whether to issue the permit to pollute, what they're looking at right now is just at that one facility, sort of looking at that one facility in a vacuum as though it's not in an environment with everything else around it. And okay, for these predetermined regulatory thresholds of different types, amounts of different types of pollutants. Is it at this level? Is it at this level? Is this appropriate for this kind of permit? Is it appropriate for a different kind of permit or not appropriate at all? But still only looking at that one facility. And what the CHERISH Act changes is instead of taking that facility-focused approach, looking at it in a vacuum, the CHERISH Act says that in the most polluted communities, you need to be looking at the whole community. You need to be looking at what's the existing health burden on the community, what other facilities are also issuing pollution in the community that's harming people's health. And instead of just thinking about, okay, is this facility itself under a certain threshold? It's more people focused. Will adding this facility to the mix harm people's health? And if MDE determines that it will, under the CHERISH Act, then they need to take action on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the importance of not looking at these permits in isolation, but definitely everything that is affected a community. And one follow-up. On your introduction, you mentioned the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition. Can you share for those folks that might not heard this coalition before, what the coalition does and how was the coalition, what is the role of the coalition in advancing this bill?
Absolutely, yeah. So the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition is a group of folks who are advocates for environmental justice issues in our case in Maryland, both frontline community organizations, environmental groups, academics who are leading researchers on environmental justice, focused on from the work that we learn doing at the from the work that we do, learning at the local level on specific site fights and specific pollution issues in the community, what needs to change at the state level to make those fights more winnable, and what protections do we need to work for at the state level to protect communities. So we came together in 2020, and so far we've worked for implementing Justice 40 provisions at the state level, taking former President Biden's approach to directing community investment to the communities that need it the most and working to implement that at the state level. We've done some critical work around defining some of the tools that went into Maryland EJ Screen and getting those into state law. And 2 years ago, we passed the Transportation Equity Act based on a lot of work here in Baltimore around the cancellation of the Red Line and all of the other transportation issues we have, to make equity a really central part of transportation planning in Maryland. So yeah, the CHERISH Act is our next big project.
Thank you, Jennifer. Carlos, on to you. If the bill, let me correct myself, when the bill passes, how will communities benefit from it? What are the tangible benefits? What they can expect and see happening?
Well, that is a great question. I believe transparency is one of the biggest things that you can see. I think that what the CHERISH Act is going to change is it'll require robust public engagement, specifically targeting what was mentioned earlier. So there will be mandatory public notices in multiple languages and formats. If there will be a new facility that's wanting to operate in your neighborhood, right? I think one of the biggest challenges the communities face is simply not knowing what's happening in their own backyards. And I think it's imperative to understand that, like, it's just too often that decisions about new facilities or permits renewals are made without meaningful input from the people who they'll be affected the most. I think that this lack of transparency, it disproportionately harms communities of color and low-income families that Maryland Latinos Unidos is committed to fighting for. But beyond that, the public hearings will be at accessible times and locations, so that way workers, we work 9 to 5. We don't have the time to meet during the day. There will be environmental impact statements and existing burden reports that detail the cumulative impacts of proposed facilities. I look forward to explaining what cumulative impacts mean in this terminology. But there's also direct involvement, right, of local elected officials and health departments in the decision-making process. And, just I like to surmise all these things by saying MOU has been advocating for this greater transparency and community engagement for years. We've seen how the lack of how the lack of information disproportionately affects Latino and immigrant communities. And we're seeing it extend into not just the Latino and immigrant communities, but even beyond. So I think those are just a few ways that can make this bill stand out the most.
Thanks, Carlos. Thank you for speaking of that language accessibility, that cultural accessibility. That is very important to be part of the permitting process of civic engagement. Let's move on to the chat. We have a few questions, so let me go to the chat and see here. First question, given the state of the budget, how about the fiscal note? The fiscal note for this bill. Is there a fiscal note already, and how can this play out?
So we won't have the official fiscal note until the bill has been released from drafting and introduced and is getting towards its public hearing. And to get past the jargon for folks, the fiscal note is an analysis that the Department of Legislative Services does for every bill about how much is it going to cost state government if this bill passes. So, and that's a particularly sensitive topic right now because there's a big deficit. And so that's definitely something that the coalition had in mind when we were drafting this, and we did as much as we could to decrease the fiscal note. For example, the requiring the company to provide a lot of the information that would go into the analysis when they apply for their permit instead of just having MDE start, the Maryland Department of the Environment start that process. But it is the million-dollar question, and we'll have to see what the Department of Legislative Services makes of it.
Thanks, Jennifer. Like any other bill, opposition. Is there any opposition? Who do we expect opposing this bill? Any takers?
There will definitely be opposition, I think, and we can expect to see, the companies that own facilities that would be impacted by the bill to come out and oppose. And that's why we really need lots of people from all over the state, especially in communities that would be protected if the CHERISH Act passes, to come out to show legislators that there's a lot of community support that they need to listen to over the opposition.
If I could chime in there as well, right? It's important that we understand this from a societal perspective. I was fortunate enough to work in the Senate, in the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and I was kind of in the room where they were discussing these bills, and my job was to anticipate the objections of both Democratic senators, Republican senators, and you would be amazed the sway and the power that the people have in simply communicating these ideas and educating the community. So I do believe, regardless of the opposition, regardless of whoever we face, MOU is going to be proud to be working on materials to promote what the Cherish Act does and what it is doing. I'm sure that MAGIC, Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition, is going to be working on some materials as well. If you can share these materials, follow MOU, and actually, pass it along to your networks. Opposition, yes, plays a role, but if the people can stand together and support this, we no need to worry about opposition, but it's always a factor. So have to say that. Inspiring note.
Thank you, Carlos. In 20 seconds, what can folks do to support this bill? What actions can they take to support the bill?
Number one is always contact your legislators. I know all of our organizations have tools that make it easy for you to do that. Number two is spread the word in your community, especially if you live in a community that would be protected by the Cherish Act. Help us get the word out and make sure people know.
On top of that, attend town halls and hearings. Show up at the public events to voice your support for the bill. Legislators need to hear directly from their constituents. Also, as I said before, partner with organizations. Join forces with groups like Maryland Latinos Unidos, League of Conservation Voters, CHISPA. Ways to amplify your voice. I think collective action is powerful. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Sadly, this is all the time we have today for our questions. And as we wrap up, I really want to thank you, Jennifer, Carlos. Thank you so much for donating your time and engaging our viewers to our audience. Thank you for joining and for your support in our work. If you have any questions, please send us our way and we'll make sure one of our team members respond to your questions. But before I leave, I want to share a few upcoming events with you. Next Friday, we'll be hosting our next digest focused on the Nearshore Farm Finance Act. We are also hosting a lobby day in Annapolis on Monday, February 17th. This is an opportunity for you to talk directly to your legislator, and you can find more information about it in our website. And finally, you can also take action today and email your Maryland state legislators telling them to support the CHERISH Act. And please fill out our short questionnaire and survey, which should be on the chat already. Thank you again. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramon, for all you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.